Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well wherever y'all are, whatever part of the day you're in. I appreciate y'all joining me here and giving me a little bit of your time. And we're going to have a little sit today because thankfully we're getting a little rain. I have one puppy dog sitting on the porch next to my rocking chair and just a little bit of rain dripping off the roof. Thank you, Lord, for rain and for getting to do this podcast one more time. All right. Just trying to think if I had anything else of note. Just that the podcast seems to be continuing to do well. So thank y'all again. We'll get going. We're going to talk today about school education, which is a frequent topic on the podcast. And in particular, the use of the Bible in school, what it's become today versus what our founders fought for. I had a comment and it just left my head, which is not shockingly unusual. I guess I'm kind of surprised by the rain. There we go. I knew it'd come back in a minute. So you hear a lot today about education, and you have for years. But if you know what to look for, you know that there's some real cracks in American public education today. And you could stretch that farther than just public education by a little bit, but primarily there. And if you talk to counselors or teachers or principals that you trust and that really are honest and know what's going on, they'll tell you that. They'll tell you that. I actually just talked to one recently, and they made the comment that weren't sure how much longer we were going to keep going or be able to keep going. And you see it in places all across the country, everywhere. A couple of real good examples, folks, are, and these aren't necessarily bad ideas that I'm about to lay out, but it shows you how shaky the system is. You see the universal school vouchers program passed this summer in Arizona. You see the teachers who just are in college, don't even have a degree, who are being allowed to teach because they're so desperately short. You see in Florida, you see the firefighters and police officers being given the ability to teach. And those really, as I said, some of those are great moves. I'm not real sure about the college age kid teaching a classroom of students that they're only about a year older than, maybe, but I don't know all the specifics of that bill, folks, so I really shouldn't speak on it. But, and you see time and again school board confrontations with parents. So what am I getting at? We always talk about, well, we need more money. We need better school systems or better textbooks, better buildings, better teachers, et cetera, whatever. None of that stuff is really the reason, folks. None of that stuff in and of itself would fix public education. The problem in public education is fundamental. We talk about it here often. The fact that we have rejected God out of the classroom. The fact that we push leftist values from, if not directly, folks, indirectly, even in the best school districts, the system still is catering to the left. You can see that with LGBTQ relationships. You can see it maybe a little bit more privately, but with the pro-choice, the abortion movement, you can see it with illegal immigration and the way we cater to students that shouldn't be here. uh, regardless of whether the fault is their own or not. You can see that in the socialist, communist, revisionist ideology that's pushed in thousands and thousands of classrooms across the country. The critical race theory, the just blatant bigotry, the feminism. Oh Lord, that one, I need to move that one up the list some, but the bigotry, identity politics, the hyphenated Americanism that's just, it's so ingrained in our system now, folks, that it's almost, if you grew up with it, or if you're growing up with it and you don't have any clue about real history, as I didn't until I started to do this podcast, honestly, folks, I knew some things were right and wrong, but I couldn't really back it up. But when you really dig into it, you see just how far off course we've got. And the biggest area goes back to rejection of God. So we're going to read through some quotes today talking about a number of our founding fathers. And this wasn't a isolated sentiment, folks, when you really get into it. This was almost a universal sentiment, at least as far as what was going to support our republic. And so we'll go ahead and get going here. Oh, the guineas decided they needed to come talk. Wonderful. All right. So we're going to start with Fisher Ames. And I'm actually going to end with him too. But so the founders predominantly, overwhelmingly wanted the Bible as the primary textbook in public schools. And every so often, somebody would say something different, but they didn't even want it just as a side textbook, folks. They wanted it as the primary textbook. So Fisher Ames, if you don't remember him from this podcast, or if you're new to the podcast, he helped frame the Bill of Rights, and he was the man that actually gave the final wording. Didn't change much, but he was the one that suggested the final wording for the First Amendment. And here's a couple of his quotes. He's commenting on a trend that he had observed recently in American education at this time. It has been the custom of late years to put a number of little books into the hands of children containing fables and moral lessons. And so he was concerned with that. He wanted the Bible to be the primary textbook, right? Why then, if these books for children must be retained, as they will be, should not the Bible regain the place it once held as a school book? Its morals are pure, its examples captivating and noble. The reverence for the sacred book that is thus early impressed lasts long, and probably, if not impressed in infancy, never takes firm hold of the mind. Which a lot of people on the left, folks, that's what they're aiming toward. They don't want the Bible to have a firm hold in the mind of our children and the future of our country. Whatever their reasoning is, I can't speak to that, but that's what their actions do. And Fisher Ames, one of our founders, right, he said, no, the Bible needs to be, it teaches the moral lessons. It's got to be there. And if it's impressed early, it lasts a long time. And it should be a school book. This is Benjamin Rush, who we talk about frequently on here. He signed the Declaration, and one of, for sure, the most notable founding fathers. And he actually wrote a little paper that we've talked about before on this podcast about why the Bible and Christian principles were so important to school. And this is, I think, just a little bitty section of it, but either way. This is from 1791. In the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, we find the following words, which are directly to my purpose. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words, which I command thee this day, shall be in thine heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. And shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. If the rain gets too loud in a minute, folks, we'll take a pause and I'll come back. I thought y'all might enjoy hear it in the background, but it may be a little much. We'll see. It sure is pretty coming down right now, though. I can tell you that after not having seen it for so long. And I can tell you that the trees and the plants are loving it. Go back to this quote, but that's such a great quote, folks. And it's so important when you're talking about Christians in particular today. How many of us really have the Bible on our hearts and minds when we wake up, when we sit down at the table? How many of us really impart that to our children? And, we spend all these hours talking to our children about. So I always use what I'm guilty of, folks. You think about your own weaknesses, right? Maybe yours are books for entertainment, or maybe yours are TV shows or whatever it is. But how many hours do we sit down talking about softball or baseball or tennis or volleyball or golf with our kids, talking about, well, we need to work on this, we need to work on that, or did you see this, did you see that? Do we sit down and talk with them even half of that much about the principles laid out by God in the Bible? It's just a question. I know the answer for me, folks, is no. And that's something that I'm desperately trying to correct quickly. Some days I do better than others. But this is the whole problem. And if we don't fix that, everything else educationally, politically, none of it matters. So we get back to this quote now from Benjamin Rush. The learning of the Jews for many years consisted in nothing but a knowledge of the Scriptures. But the benefits of an early and general acquaintance with the Bible were not confined only to the Jewish nations. They have appeared in many countries in Europe since the Reformation. The industry and habits of order which distinguish many of the German nations are derived from the early instruction in the principles of Christianity by means of the Bible. The moral and enlightened character of the inhabitants of Scotland and the New England states appears to be derived from the same cause, the Bible. The Bible should be read in our schools in preference to all other books. Little side note, I'm pulling these quotes. You can find them a number of places, folks, but I'm pulling the ones I'm pulling today are from the Founder's Bible, which if you don't have a copy, it's a phenomenal resource. I recommend it highly, along with the Patriot's Bible and America's God and Country Encyclopedia. Those three, I have some others that I recommend, but those three, above all, I recommend. I feel like every home needs a copy of them, and every classroom, without doubt, needs a copy of them. Excuse me, a little drink. And those copies in those classrooms need to be well worn and used and read. A couple quotes here. See how we're doing on time. Maybe we'll just go to this one quote first, and then I'll come back to the story and give you a little brief of it. Daniel Webster, one of our leading statesmen, lawyer, orator. The gospel is either true history or it is a consummate fraud. It is either a reality or an imposition. Christ was what he professed to be, or he was an impostor. There is no other alternative. His spotless life in his earnest enforcement of the truth, his suffering in its defense, forbid us to suppose that he was suffering an illusion of a heated brain. Every act of his pure and holy life shows that he was the author of truth, the advocate of truth, the earnest defender of truth, and the uncompromising sufferer of truth. Now, considering the purity of his doctrines, the simplicity of his life, and the sublimity of his death, is it possible that he would have died for an illusion? In all his preaching, the Savior made no popular appeals. His discourses were always directed to the individual. Christ and his apostles sought to impress upon every man the conviction that he must stand or fall alone. He must live for himself and die for himself and give up his account to the omniscient God as though he were the only dependent creature in the universe. The gospel leaves the individual sinner alone with himself and his God. The reason I read that, I have time to get through these last two quotes, and I was just thinking I really should have pulled a couple from John and Abigail Adams about, and Washington too, about the need in instructing children early on. But here's just a little clip out of the Founder's Bible again. Interestingly, the pages of American history are filled with similar accounts of American heroes who got an early start in the Bible. For example, when signer of the Declaration, John Witherspoon, was 4 years old, he had already finished reading the Bible from cover to cover. And while still a child, he could recite nearly all the New Testament by memory. Founding Father John Trumbull, a justice on the Supreme Court of Connecticut, also finished reading through the Bible by the time he was 4. When famous author Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of the abolitionist classic Uncle Tom's Cabin, was 7 years old, she had already memorized 27 hymns and several chapters of the Bible. And when the great Daniel Webster, the defender of the Constitution, was just a young lad, his school teacher, James Tappan, reported, "I held up a handsome new jackknife to the scholars and said the boy who would commit to memory the greatest number of verses in the Bible by Monday morning should have it." Many of the boys did well, but when it came to Daniel's turn to recite, I found that he had committed so much to memory that after hearing him repeat some 60 or 70 verses, I was obliged to give up, he telling me that there were several chapters yet he had learned. Daniel got that jackknife. So I read the first quote from Webster, because he was educated. He was one of our great statesmen, and he was educated in the Bible early on. And it shapes the whole world view. You know, we've talked about that often. Not all of the signers, delegates to the Constitutional Convention, were Christian. There were a few that weren't, but even those that weren't, folks, the very few that weren't, the very, very few, they came from a biblical worldview. They knew that you had to have those principles, and they knew that they had to be taught to our children. When you go back to the verse from Deuteronomy talking about, do we teach our children? Do we get up and talk about it? Do we talk about it when we're sitting down at the table in our house? And we have done the exact opposite today. We've taken the Bible out of the classroom, and we're having all these problems, this long, long list that I don't even have time to go into completely. And then we can't figure out why we're struggling so much. And this was just a real brief, just two really, I guess, or three or four founders that felt this way. And there's many, many more that you could talk about, folks. But if we want to fix education, if we really do the very first thing, and there's about 6 or 7 things that we have to do, but the very first thing we have to do is put the Bible back in the center as the primary textbook. And it's easy to do, folks. It's not hard to do in English. It's not hard to do in history. It's not hard to do in science. Math, maybe you could make some arguments there I've talked about before. I don't know. It's not hard to do in foreign language. And so it's not hard to do in the arts at all. None of these. There's so much that you can use in each of these subjects. I'm going to read one more, and then I'll leave y'all with it, folks. Fisher Ames again. We have a dangerous trend beginning to take place in our education. We're starting to put more and more textbooks into our schools. We've become accustomed of late of putting little books in the hands of children containing fables and moral lessons. We are spending less time in the classroom on the Bible, which should be the principal text of our schools. The Bible states these great moral lessons better than any other man-made book. So part of that was a quote I read before, but I really wanted to read it because, again, he said the principal textbook. That's what it's got to be, folks. And, man, if we don't wake up to that real fast, then we may already be past the point. And if we are, that's okay. You know, maybe God will give us another chance. He certainly did after the Civil War, after the Revolutionary War. So we can fix it next time and we can get it right. But We've got to have God at the center of our classroom, and we've got to make sure that we teach our children history well enough so that generation after generation after generation, they know what our country is centered on and founded on. Sure do appreciate y'all joining me. Hope y'all enjoyed the rain. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. We will talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it, folks.